Warning: the following video contains unconventional hockey predictions that may not be suitable for some audiences. Said predictions may lead to unsafe levels of confusion and salt. Viewer discretion advised.
Hey everyone, this is Nick with Twisted Wrister Hockey, and welcome to my 2018-2019 Metropolitan Division preview. Now, the Metropolitan Division has actually won the Stanley Cup the past 3 seasons. Washington Capitals, of course, this past season, and then the prior 2 seasons, Pittsburgh Penguins. And then if you wanted to actually reach back to see who the last Stanley Cup champion was from this division, you'd actually have to go back to 2006 when the Carolina Hurricanes went on an improbable run there. So, could any of these teams return to the Cup in 2018-2019? Time will tell, but there are some great teams on the rise here in this division. Now make sure if you haven't already to check out my other 3 division previews for the Central, the Pacific, and the Atlantic. And then after this video, I will actually make one more video in which I will crown my Stanley Cup champion for this coming season. Now these are just my impressions for the season ahead. I could be totally wrong. I could get, 3 out of these 4 playoff teams incorrect. Let me know in the comments below who you think is going to win this division. Now, I don't expect you to agree with me here. I just needed to kind of vary my predictions from others and make things a little bit different so that we see a couple of new teams emerge and make the playoffs this year. So if your team made the playoffs last year and I haven't included them this year, that doesn't mean that I don't think they're good teams. All right, they have great players, and if I'm wrong with my predictions here, I won't be entirely surprised. So let me know your predictions in the comments below and get ready for some wacky predictions up ahead. Okay, everyone, so without further ado, let's go.
Okay, everyone, so let's go ahead and get started with some statistical rankings from this past season. So then that way you get a sense of how these teams statistically performed. So from left to right, you see the teams as they finish from 1 to 8 in the division. And then I actually statistically ranked each team across key statistical categories like goals for, goals against, shot percentage, giveaways, blocked shots, power play, penalty kill, all the essential statistics. So for each team, the left column actually represents how that team ranked within the Metro Division, and then the right column represents how that team ranked across all 31 teams in the league. So then if you were to actually rank these teams 1 to 30 by their average statistical position per any given stat category, this is how they would rank. So Pittsburgh, they finished 6th in the NHL, Philadelphia was 9th, the Devils were 13th, Washington was 15th, Columbus was right behind in 16th, Carolina 19th, the Islanders at 20th, and the Rangers at 23rd. So if we're looking purely at statistical rankings, this is how the teams should have finished last year. So if you're to compare the teams among themselves in the division, and if you were to compare them across all teams in the NHL, Pittsburgh should have won the division. Philadelphia was the second best. Depending on which ranking system you use, either Washington or New Jersey would have finished 3rd and 4th, Columbus 5th, and then there's a little bit of variation in the bottom 3 teams. So I've taken some of this information into consideration, as well as how these teams performed in the offseason. So here are my predictions, starting from the bottom and working my way to the top. So at number 8, I have the New York Rangers, and I'm projecting them to finish with 72 points, which is down from 77 last year. The main reason why I did this is because, look, they're committed to a full rebuild. Their defense is not very deep. You don't have high profile talent there, Shattenkirk aside a little bit. And goaltending, Lundqvist is still a very good goaltender, but he is getting older. He is wearing down a little. The New York Rangers brought in a new head coach, David Quinn from Boston University. He had some good success there, but yeah, he's pretty new to the NHL. They really didn't do too much in the offseason to commit to this rebuild even more. I still think the top 6 is pretty respectable. Mika Zibanejad, Chris Kreider, Matt Zuccarello, Pavel Buchnevich, Ryan Spooner, Vladislav Nemesnikov. Those are pretty solid players. They're not going to go out and score 80 points apiece, but they can still be productive. The 4th line for the Rangers is very young and inexperienced, but obviously with this season ahead, they'll gain some necessary experience and perhaps start to build that new core for New York. The blue line overall is fairly underwhelming. They brought in Adam McQuaid in the offseason. You've got Brady Shea. He could emerge as the best defenseman within the next year or two, but he kind of needs to return to form from the season prior in which he put up 39 points. Neil Pionk is someone who could possibly fit his way into the top 4 later in the season, and I think that he put up pretty good numbers in his limited time last season. Kevin Shattenkirk is the guy that you look for to put up points. He'll need to play like he did 2 seasons ago when he was not too far off in the Norris voting, and he put up a lot of points then. Henrik Lundqvist is still a workhorse. As far as their actual backup goaltender, we'll see if Georgiev or Dustin Tokarski makes their way into that spot. Overall, I think it's good that the Rangers are committed to this rebuild, and that way they're very transparent with their fans, and they're able to commit to doing what they can to get younger and develop that talent. So I think that bringing in a college coach who's worked with younger players, that should help them out in the future. So even though they're in the basement now, that's not to say that they'll be in the basement a couple years from now. At number 7, this will definitely surprise you, but I've got the New Jersey Devils. So I'm expecting them to definitely drop off from where they were last season. The main reason is because, look, I love the season that Taylor Hall had. In terms of offensive effectiveness, he and Connor McDavid were way ahead of anybody else, way ahead of McKinnon, Kopitar, Giroux, etc. He really took the team on his back and into the playoffs. The thing is that I just don't know if that one season was an anomaly for him or if he can actually continue that. And the Devils are very young as a whole. They have players who are 19, 20, 21 years old, and they just don't necessarily have enough experience collectively to possibly, maintain their position in the division. I think that the guys they lost in the offseason weren't actually that integral to them. I do miss the absence of John Moore for sure, but other than that, they're not really missing out on anybody who contributed a lot to last year. So it's really going to take this young core this season, next season, to possibly build up their strengths and emerge possibly as one of the better teams in the division. I also think that there's a bit of a concern with guys like Marcus Johansson and also Kyle Palmieri. When they're healthy, they can put up 50 points or more. The top line could be pretty good. You got Taylor Hall, obviously. You've got Nico Hischier, who had a very good season in his rookie year. He needs to improve in the faceoff circle, but other than that, very good PDO rating. He'll probably get more chances with the power play unit. He's definitely an up-and-comer in this league. But then just starting with the second line, you're already talking about guys who need more time in the NHL. They need more time to develop their strengths. Pavel Zacha and Jesper Bratt are among those guys. Now, defensively as a whole, the Devils are particularly good at forcing turnovers. Taylor Hall himself forced 81. They're fairly balanced in their age and abilities in their 6 defensemen. You've got Sami Vatanen, who's the all-around cornerstone. He can put up 35 to 40 points in a full season. Will Butcher had a very good rookie year. I don't think he got talked about too much because you had guys like Hall and you had the rookie Hischier. So he put up 44 points. He had 20 power play assists last year. So you look at that power play percentage, it was pretty good. And I think that Will Butcher was a big component to that. In terms of shutdown defensemen, I look at Steven Santini on the third pairing. Definitely ignore his Corsi when you're looking at his stats, but he started in the defensive zone 72.5% of the time. He still had a 101.9 PDO rating, 73 block shots in 36 games. Yes, 113 hits in just 36 games. Now, I know that there's somebody out there who doesn't like him particularly, but those are some pretty good numbers for a shutdown defenseman. Now, in terms of replacing John Moore, look for Mirko Muller to get more into the lineup. He didn't really pan out too well in San Jose, and then he got traded over to the Devils, and he had 42 blocks in 28 games. That's a pretty good block shot ratio. He has good puck control. He's not going to wow you offensively, but again, he could be a steady rock for them on defense. In terms of goaltending, Corey Schneider's had a couple of rough seasons recently. In his first 3 seasons with the Devils, he had a 2.14 goals against and a 924 save percentage. And those teams weren't always that good. So is it possible for him to kind of return to form? It could be. He's getting a little bit older, but at 32, he still has some good hockey in him, you would think. Keith Kincaid could definitely assume a starter role if necessary, or a starter 1B role. And he's proven himself as a very good backup in the league. Overall, I like the development of Nico Hischier and Will Butcher for sure. If Taylor Hall regresses in productivity, that top line could still be good. But it's a matter of health among their forwards and a need for Jesper Bratt, Pavel Zacha, and Miles Wood to continue progressing. I overall like New Jersey's defense. Their defensive system is good. The goaltending is still a little bit of a question when looking at last year. When healthy, Corey Schneider could still carry a big workload at 60 games plus, but can he get back to where he was in 2015, 2016? That remains a big question for New Jersey. In 6th place, I've got the New York Islanders. Now, many people think that the Islanders could possibly finish at the bottom of the league this year because John Tavares is no longer there. But my sort of antidote to that is Barry Trotz. I admire Barry Trotz for not only what he achieved in Washington, but what he achieved for the Nashville Predators as a young franchise. There was a stretch in which the Predators made the playoffs 7 out of 8 years under Barry Trotz. And even then, they had some good players. They had Ryan Suter, they had Shea Weber, but they didn't have a whole lot of offensive firepower. They had good goaltending for sure. And so I think that when you look at defense and goaltending, that's where the Islanders could possibly benefit from Barry Trotz. Trotz has worked with Pekka Rinne, he's worked with Tomas Vokoun, he's worked with Braden Holtby. He's got a good track record of being behind the bench for good goaltending and good defense. I also like a couple of additions to the defensive side of things by bringing in Leo Komarov, who's a very good defensive forward for the Maple Leafs, and Valtteri Filppula, who also can block shots and force turnovers. So I think that the Islanders can be a little bit more well-rounded in that respect. Now, despite Tavares being gone, I still think the Islanders can put up some points. I mean, they were one of the better teams in scoring last year. You got Matt Barzal, who, he centers his own line. He's going to be very good. You've got Jordan Eberle. You've got Anders Lee. You've got Josh Bailey. Now, I don't expect these guys to be up in 70-plus point territory, but they can still be respectable on that team. Defensively, I still think that the Islanders could be a liability, but there is a little bit of upside here. So Nick Leddy can still put up points. He can put up 40-plus. Ryan Pulak, he would be the guy to watch. He put up 32 points in 68 games in his first full season, in addition to all-around decent numbers across the board. So I think that he'll be playing more than 20 minutes of ice time this season. Thomas Hickey fits in well in the top 4. He had a pretty high PDO last year, 103.7, and he chipped in 25 points. Johnny Boychuk is kind of the grizzled vet of this group. He can't eat those top 2 minutes anymore, but he's still serviceable. I think that Trotz's experience with good goaltenders could possibly help Robin Lehner and kind of go back to where he was a couple of seasons ago. With the Islanders, I could see them definitely coming together and leading by committee, not relying on one person to just carry the load for them. They're actually a team of established veterans. They're not a young team. They know what to expect from each other. So I just don't see why they can't be competitive in the early part of the season. In 5th place, this will also surprise you, but I've got the Philadelphia Flyers. Again, I wanted to vary these division predictions, so unfortunately that means taking Philly out of the top 4. So Philly in the offseason, they acquired James Van Riemsdyk, and that's going to help them a lot with boosting their power play productivity. He had 11 power play goals last season. Among their weak points was the penalty kill, and I actually like the addition of Christian Folin, who played for the Kings last season and was a part of that very good defense. I think Philly has an excellent top 6. Nolan Patrick should definitely integrate more with that offense, and I think that he's going to develop pretty well with James Van Riemsdyk on his wing. Now, when looking at the penalty kill last year, I noticed that there were guys like Matt Reed and Valtteri Filppula who could block shots and force turnovers, but now they're gone, so who is going to step in and do that? You would probably rely on Sean Couturier, you could probably rely on Wayne Simmons if he's healthy, but that's still a weak point for this team, I think. In terms of goaltending, I want to believe that Michael Neuwirth can come in and at least be a 1A starter, but really health is too much of a concern with him, and his numbers are overall inconsistent. Brian Elliott has been just about average in his past 2 years. If he could get closer to his averages from the last 6 years combined, then we'd have a pretty different player. If you look at his last 6 years, he has nearly a .920 save percentage and a 2.22 GAA, although those really good numbers were with St. Louis. So ever since he's been in Calgary and Philadelphia, his numbers have been kind of average. You can't underestimate the capabilities of Shane Gostisbehere and Ivan Provorov, but looking at defensive depth and goaltending, that's just too much of an issue for me at this point, so that's why I don't have the Philadelphia Flyers any higher than 5th. Coming in at 4th place, I've got the Carolina Hurricanes. Dougie Hamilton, Jacob Slavin, Justin Falk, Calvin DeHaan. Sebastian Aho, Teuvo Teravainen, Andrei Svechnikov. This team could be pretty legit, right? Well, it's really a dual-edged sword with Carolina. They made some great additions in the offseason, and they got Svechnikov, so things could be very exciting in the years ahead for Carolina. But unfortunately, they decided to trade Jeff Skinner, and their goaltenders last year were the worst in the league for sure. So what did they do to improve that? They added Petr Mrazek, and he's a very inconsistent goaltender, but I do have a point to that. Look at Mrazek's 2015-2016 season with Detroit. In 54 games, he went 27, 16, and 6 with a .921 save percentage and a goals against of 2.33. That's pretty good, and I think that he could actually come closer to that now that he's with a very solid defensive core. I still don't know why Carolina decided to offload some of its really solid depth scoring. Elias Lindholm, Derek Roy, those guys did more than we give them credit for, I think. I do like bringing in Dougie Hamilton because he adds some scoring to the blue line. And overall, that blue line, look at these stats here, right? They were number 1 in shots against. They were at the top of takeaways. They were a very disciplined team too, so they're fundamentally pretty sound. I just think that it really relies on Mrazek's ability to step in and say, hey, Scott Darling, why don't you go back to being a backup and doing really well at that? And I'll come in and I'll play 55 games, and I'll play like I did in Detroit a couple years ago. In terms of leadership overall, I'm going to go ahead and say that Carolina is headed in the right direction. They brought in Rod Brindamore, who actually won a cup with them in 2006. And they just named Justin Williams the full-time captain, so he is their looked-to leader on this team. He's Mr. Game 7. He knows what to do to be successful. So I think that the combination of Justin and Rod Brindamore is actually going to propel Carolina and get them into the playoffs. It's about damn time that they made it. At number 3, I've got the Washington Capitals. So I think that the Stanley Cup hangover could possibly prevail in this case. With Washington, they lost some of their depth pieces like Jay Beagle and Alex Chason. They also lost Philip Grubauer, who played an integral part in Washington's ability to even qualify for the playoffs. And most significantly, they lost Barry Trotz, and I already said a lot about him. Todd Reardon has been an assistant coach with that organization, so he is very familiar with these players. It's his first time actually as a head coach, so we'll see how he does. But in terms of, Ovechkin's abilities and how he played in the playoffs, and even Kuznetsov for that matter, and Oshie, I just don't think it's right to expect these guys to come out like gangbusters and do it again. I mean, we'll see what happens when they get to the postseason, but for the regular season, I say, hey, they've got some experienced veterans. They know how to get it done when it matters most at this point. So I think that they're not going to quite have their foot on the gas like they did at the end of last season, and I think they'll regress just a little bit. So to replace Philip Grubauer, I think that Phoenix Copley will be called up, and he'll play a backup role for Braden Holtby. So Copley, he played for the Hershey Bears last season, and they just were not a good team, so I would kind of ignore his stats there, but he had some very good seasons before that. He's 26 years old too, so he doesn't really need to develop too much more, even though he's never really played in the NHL. Braden Holtby was a beast for the Capitals in the playoffs. I think that he'll play a little bit more like he has in his past seasons versus the regular season last year. His confidence is back. He's got John Carlson back there with him, Dmitry Orlov, Matt Niskanen. That's a good, solid defensive core. I think that Washington overall is still a good team. Don't get me wrong. It's just that if they get into a slump, I could definitely see Ovechkin or Oshie wishing they were doing keg stands. Anyway, Washington, they'll still be in the playoffs, but once again, I don't necessarily think they'll go as far as they possibly would have if they hadn't won the cup in the first place. Coming in at number 2, I've got the Columbus Blue Jackets, so I think that they can actually crack 100 points this coming season. I like some of the additions that they made with Riley Nash coming in for depth. Anthony Duclair, he could be competing for a roster spot because when I look at Columbus, they actually have a pretty good set of 4 lines here. So I'm going to read this top to bottom as what I saw on Roster Resource. Artemi Panarin, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Cam Atkinson. Boone Jenner, Alexander Wenberg, Josh Anderson. Sonny Milano, Nick Foligno, Oliver Bjorkstrand, I forgot his first name, but Hannakainen, maybe Anthony Duclair, and then you'd have Brandon Dubinsky as your center, and Riley Nash. So I really like that group of 4 lines there. I think that maybe other than Washington, that might be the best in the division. You have a good mix of young talent. You have some seasoned veterans like Atkinson and Foligno, but you got to talk about that blue line because, man, it is a deadly one. You've got Zach Werenski. You've got Seth Jones. You've got David Savard, a very solid shutdown defenseman. And you also have Marcus Nudavara. I'm expecting him to break out this season. That could be one of the best defensive groups in the league. Now, in terms of the cap situation and goaltending, so we have Sergei Bobrovsky. He's been a backbone for this team. He's won 2 Vezina trophies. And he said that he's told the front office what he expects to do after this season when his contract expires. Then you've also got Artemi Panarin, who said that he was hoping to be traded or a deal to be worked out, and then the deadline passed, and so now he's saying, okay, I just want to play as well as I can this year, and then in the offseason we can talk contracts. So both of these guys, coming into the last year of their contracts, I think that they could actually have one of those big, high-performance years. So Panarin, he could actually surpass his 82 points. Bobrovsky could play like a Vezina-caliber goaltender again, maybe even beyond that. In terms of who stays, who goes, I actually will project this. I think that Artemi Panarin will actually sign with Columbus in the long term. And I think that Bobrovsky would go somewhere else. I think that Columbus would rather invest in Panarin because he's actually, top line. He's an anchor for this team. They really need him, and he's getting into his prime now. Bobrovsky, as fantastic as he is, I think that they could actually be confident with Jonas Korpisalo. Come on, so many good goaltenders come from Finland. And also, that defense is only going to get better, and they're going to protect any goalie that is between the pipes. You also have to consider the young players who are going to be restricted free agents at the end of this next year. So Zach Werenski, he's going to need to get a pretty big deal. So I think that he and Panarin will get their deals. Bobrovsky will probably walk at the end of the season, or trade deadline, I should say. But nonetheless, I think that Columbus is a strong, stacked team. But take a look at that right column. So special teams, they were actually pretty bad. So Cam Atkinson and Nick Foligno, they only combined for 5 power play goals this past year. The season before that, they had 21 combined power play goals. Most of their young guys are going to be chipping in on the power play, so I think that overall, the young core of Columbus should be trending up. Now, why was the penalty kill bad? Well, one of the reasons is because Bobrovsky's career save percentage shorthanded is not very good. It's 872. And this past season, it was only 832. So I think that overall, Columbus has to give up fewer quality chances. Atkinson, Wenberg, Foligno, Hannakainen, these guys are good at blocking shots, but they need to, I guess, be a little bit more aggressive with forcing turnovers, getting their sticks in the passing lanes and whatnot. Okay, and so my division winner by almost process of elimination at this point is Pittsburgh. So I think that Pittsburgh, they were the most high-powered offense this last year. They were the best on the power play. Not too much has changed in terms of their firepower. Yeah, I know that Connor Sherry went to Buffalo, but they brought in Matt Cullen, and he's, he can win draws, and he can still produce at his age. Derek Grant is a good depth piece in case they need to go to him should one of their other guys go down. And come on, I mean, you've got Sidney Crosby, you've got Malkin, you've got Kessel. These guys put up big numbers. Of course, Crosby is the best leader in the NHL, and I think that their defense is good enough, I guess, to win the division. So Brian Dumoulin, Justin Schultz, Oli Mata, those guys are going to be solid enough defensively to help Pittsburgh win this division. Matt Murray, I know that he had a tough year last year. He had injury troubles. He lost his father. I think that he's going to bounce back this next season. He's going to be healthy. He's going to be refreshed. Speaking of bounce backs, I also like Derek Brassard to fit in much better because he can actually play for them for a full season. I think he's going to be just fine. He adds a lot of center depth and some secondary scoring. And you have to factor this in as well. Pittsburgh is going to be out to win because they don't want Washington winning that division again. They don't want Washington getting back to the Stanley Cup. They mean business. I think they'll find their way back to the top of the division, and I think that Sidney Crosby and Yevgeny Malkin will be leading by example. By the way, I also want to extend my condolences to Mike Sullivan, who lost his father a couple days ago. I hope that everything's okay with him and his family, and I'm sure that Pittsburgh is supporting him very well too.
All right, friends, so those are my predictions. Pretty weird, huh? Can you believe that I would actually put the Carolina Hurricanes ahead of the Philadelphia Flyers and the New Jersey Devils? Look, like I said, I had to make things interesting. So if any of those bottom teams from the division last year are to make the playoffs this year, I'm going to pick the Hurricanes because they have the best defense. And what about putting the Blue Jackets all the way at number 2? Well, I think that 2 seasons ago, they had that huge winning streak, and that's when they really started to kind of ascend in the division. So I think that they have a lot to build on already, and I really like their forward depth. Their goaltending is outstanding. Even if they trade Bobrovsky, I think that defense could play really well for Korpisalo. I expect big things from the Blue Jackets in the regular season. We'll see what happens in the postseason, of course. And again, Washington Stanley Cup hangover, I somewhat attribute that to having a new head coach. And remember, just because somebody performed well in the playoffs that you're not as familiar with, like a Andre Burakovsky or a Devontae Smith-Pelly, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to have the same type of success in the regular season. So it's a totally different season, and I am looking forward to see how those guys perform. So there you have it. I've actually predicted all 4 divisions at this point. Now it's up for me to kind of put together a bracket essentially and predict who I think is going to advance to the conference finals and to the Stanley Cup and who's going to take home the hardware. So stay tuned for that video, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'm putting out videos twice a week on oddball hockey topics, jersey unboxings, homebrewed statistical analyses, and more. This is Nick with Twisted Wrister Hockey. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again soon.